Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 15th of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, mixed weather across UK. Plymouth and Coventry, a bit on the cloudy, dull side, but reasonably warm. We've got a little bit of rain in Norfolk, but the prize for sunshine goes to Brighton in the south and east central Scotland. So, lucky them.
We're going to start with Theresa.
Yes.
She's warn everybody before we put the picture up. She is wearing red. So here she is. She was speaking at the Guildhall in the City of London last night for the annual Lord Mayor's banquet. And, well, what a crowd they were. And she had this to say. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because it's worthwhile perhaps having to think about what she means by some of these comments. She says, we meet tonight in a world transformed. A year ago, few among us would have predicted the events ahead. A clear, determined decision to leave the European Union to forge a bold, new, confident future for ourselves and the world. And, of course, a new president-elect in the US who defied the polls and pundits all the way up to election day itself. Change is in the air, she said, and when people demand change, it's the job of politicians to respond. But it's also the job of those in positions of influence and power, politicians, business leaders, and others, to understand the drivers of that demand as well. So people want change. We've got to try to work out why they want change and perhaps give them some kind of payoff. Well, let's see what she said. And I think that if we take a step back and look at the world around us, one of the most important drivers becomes clear. The forces of liberalism and globalization, which have held sway in Britain, America, and across the Western world for years, have left too many people behind. Let's be clear, those forces have had and continue to have an overwhelmingly positive impact on our world. Liberalism and globalization have delivered unprecedented levels of wealth and opportunity. They've lifted millions out of poverty around the world. They have brought nations closer together, broken down barriers, and improved standards of living and consumer choice. And they underpin the rules-based international system that is key to global prosperity and security, and which I'm clear we must protect and seek to strengthen.
Well, several people commenting on that in the chat box. A mild comment is, does she actually understand what she is saying? And this was my question before we started the news. Was she just given a speech and she gets in that room and starts reeling it off? But if she believes what she's saying, this lady is clearly not living in the same world that I see, where we have unprecedented levels of warfare, violence, breakdown, hunger, disease, and most of it is, of course, promoted by the very global elite she's talking about.
Well, and talking to, because remember who her audience was.
Indeed.
City of London, Lord Mayor's Guildhall, and so on. Anyway, just to finish this a little bit off, she said, but we can't deny, as I know you recognise, the audience that she was speaking to, that there have been downsides to globalization in recent years, and that in our zeal and enthusiasm to promote this agenda, so she admits it's an agenda, as the answer to all our ills, we have on occasion overlooked the impact on those closer to home who see these forces in a different light. So she then said, these people, often those on modern and low incomes living in rich countries like our own, see their jobs being outsourced and wages undercut. They see their communities changing around them and they don't remember agreeing to that change. They see the emergence of a new global elite who sometimes seem to play by a different set of rules and whose lives are far removed from their everyday existence. And the tensions and difference between those who are gaining from globalization and those who feel they're losing out have been exposed ever more starkly through the growth of social media. So if we are to continue to make the case for liberalism and globalization, as we must, we have also to face up to and respond to these concerns.
They're getting a little bit worried, Mike, about people who can actually get in front of others and talk about what's happening and analyse it. I think there's a little smell of fear here.
Well, let's go on. She said, because when you refuse to accept that globalization in its current form has left too many people behind, you're not sowing the seeds for its growth, but for its ruin. When you fail to see that the liberal consensus that has held sway for decades has failed to maintain the consent of many people, you're not the champion of liberalism, but the enemy of it. When you dismiss the very real and deeply felt concerns of ordinary people, whether here at home or abroad, You're not acting to defend your worldview, but to undermine it. And there is no contradiction between embracing globalization and saying it is to be managed to work for everyone. So they're going to manage it. The free range farmed population, which is increasingly finding itself not free range cattle anymore, have to be given just a little bit more of the free range, because otherwise they start to complain.
Yeah, and clearly the complaints are now beginning to hurt the establishment a little bit. Actually, we have one comment that clearly Theresa May has had a bit of a makeover. She's certainly looking younger, whether that's due to makeup or possibly drinking blood, I'm not sure.
Right. Okay. Well, right. So then she started describing how really. Well, here we go. Here's the quote. All of us here tonight know that there is not some choice between hard Brexit and soft Brexit. It's about how business and government works together. Right. So this is what we're doing. The free trade agreements, of course, merging corporate governance and political governance. This is what she's talking about. She then went on to discuss 6 centuries banquets in the Guildhall, about the livery companies and how great they were, and so on. So yeah, and then she goes on to say that since the 12th century, the guilds and livery companies have not only promoted trade and business, but also training and skills, research and innovation. They led by example, developing the simplest and best form of corporate governance that there's ever been. My word is my bond. You're right. She then describes their charitable benefits, the almshouses that they built over the years.
Sorry, somebody else says that this is comedy. It is very hard to. I wonder how many people have found it hard to keep a straight face in that hall, or do they also believe this comedy?
They buy into it. Now, the key point here is if we switch off the comedy for a second, because it is comedic, but she's making serious points as well, because what she's talking about is the merger between corporate and political governance. She's also talking about increased influence from corporates and businesses in the third sector. So when she's talking about almshouses, she's talking about charity, and of course we're seeing the charity sector driving much of the governance changes that we're seeing in the country. So there is a serious side to this.
And we're going to have some examples of this later in the news, when we're going to be looking, amongst other things, at the probation service.
But just to finish it off then, what she ended up by saying was, time and again, it is British leadership, British hard and soft power, that is at the forefront of how the world responds to the greatest challenges of our time. So she's, again, trying to position British soft power as being the front and center in this campaign to deal with the backlash against globalization and liberalism, and basically their entire agenda.
Well, one of the things I get out of this is that they are coming into the open as the criticism is mounting, and they're having to respond to it. What they say, what they do, it's becoming clearer that the real problem, of course, is not government in Westminster. It's the shadow government in the City of London. So, analyse her words, and we learn quite a lot, I think, about what's really going on.
But that was last night, and then this morning, a bit of embarrassment for Theresa, because apparently somebody has leaked a document. This is the Independent's coverage of it. Theresa May still has no plan for Brexit, leaked document reveals. This has been right across the mainstream media. I could have chosen any media company or even the BBC for this. This is a memo dated the 7th of November. It was obtained by the Times. And it's suggesting that, among other things, the cabinet is absolutely split, and because of the splits, Brexit is being delayed. Nobody who's been watching this program should be in the least bit surprised about this, because the reality is there is no Brexit. But anyway, they're saying that no plan for it. However, Number 10 said that this memo was not recognised.
Yeah.
Now, that is the phrase that they roll out, not recognised. The government does not recognise the leaked memo's claim. This is what they roll out, this phrase, whenever they don't want to deny something, because they know that it's true, but they can't admit it.
Yeah.
So they say they don't recognise it.
So it's the same government, of course, pushing out letters now from every department that are simply not signed. It comes with a name. You don't know whether the name's real or not, but the letter's not signed.
Right. So Chris Grayling commented on the memo. He said, my own experience is very different to that. well, that's a non-answer as well. So they're clearly refusing to answer. But Brexit means Brexit, of course, which is why Britain has re-opted into Europol. Now, Europol, of course, is the European Union's police agency. Well, they have basically, as part of Britain's original EU opt-outs, choices that they make as to which EU institutions Britain belongs to. Europol was always one that we opted into, and then it was up for renewal basically. So they have opted in, and of course that's really an important thing because, as Brandon Lewis says, the UK is leaving the EU, not, but the reality of cross-border crime remains. Europol provides a valuable service to the UK, and opting in would enable us to maintain our current access to the agency. So he then also said, because Europol is helping keep the people of Britain safe, we now await the outcome of the scrutiny process. So what is that? Well, basically, the fact that they've opted in will go to the House of Commons and the House of Lords EU Scrutiny Committee, and they'll look at it and what?
Well, they're not going to do anything.
No.
Things are going to continue as normal, Mike. But what a disgusting man Mr. Lewis is, because, of course, this is head of policing who has simply failed to do anything to support the Metropolitan Police whistleblower, who took huge risks to talk about the deliberate cover-up of child prostitution, child trafficking, child murder in London, where the officer talks about MPs being involved in the cover-up, local authorities and charities. And, where is this man? Well, he's suddenly moved as Privy Council, I think he's hopped into, actually. I think he's had a little bit of a promotion. But he's not telling the truth about what's happening with children in London. He's not telling the truth about Europol, because, of course, Europol is being used to train British police in a paramilitary style. So a very, very dangerous organisation.
Okay, we'll move on to Syria then. This people in Aleppo furious after terrorists block their exit. Now, it's 24, 25, 26 days, I'm not sure, since Russia stopped bombing eastern Aleppo. Over that period of time, there have been steady warnings that obviously with the Russian fleet moving into the Mediterranean for the final effort in Aleppo to clear out ISIS terrorists from eastern Aleppo. The Russians and the Syrians have been warning people that remain in eastern Aleppo to leave. They've been setting up corridors, giving them opportunities to go. But this article making the point that, in fact, the terrorists in eastern Aleppo are blocking civilians from leaving because, of course, they want to use them as human shields. So this is re-reporting Al Watan, which is an Arabic language news outlet, saying that the Syrian army's deadline for the exit of terrorists from eastern districts of Aleppo has ended. And certainly there was a message went into eastern Aleppo, I think, yesterday, that they had 24 hours before the final clear-up would begin. So people have been given the opportunity, but they're being prevented by ISIS terrorists. And in fact, Vanessa Bailey told me a day or two ago that people from the so-called rebel groups that were trying to defect to the west were being shot in the back as they tried to leave.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty nasty situation in there, and needs to be cleared out. And that brings me into tomorrow evening, our monthly meeting. And the briefing this month is from Vanessa Bailey. So please get along to the George in Plimpton at 7:30 tomorrow night if you'd like to listen to that.
It will be extremely interesting. And I also say that our local MP, Mr. Gary Streeter, Conservative, has been advertising another pub. And we'd like to say to people, don't bother with the recommendations of Gary Streeter. The George is an excellent pub, and whether or not you attend a briefing, you might like to go there for a social evening or a meal.
Okay. Unaccompanied children, the saga continues. This is a new report that's come out today. Now, it's discussing child trafficking victims, and it's also discussing unaccompanied children. So what they're saying is that in 1 year, 30% of all UK child trafficking victims in the care system and 13% of unaccompanied children in the care system disappeared from that care system. This is the report heading back to harm. They're basically saying trafficked and unaccompanied asylum-seeking children are going missing from the UK care at an alarmingly high rate, is how they're describing it. This is from an NGO called ECPAT UK in collaboration, I'm allowed to use that word,
Just, I think.
with a charity called Missing People. And just some of the figures here, 167 of 590 children identified as child trafficking victims vanished from foster care and care homes. 593 of the 4,744 unaccompanied children placed in the protection of local authorities went missing at least once in the same time period. And the third statistic they say is that of 760 trafficked or unaccompanied children who disappeared from care, 207 have never been found.
Yeah. And what this absolutely ties in with, of course, what the Metropolitan Police whistleblower said, because in his testimony, he said that when he investigated children's homes, he found in a matter of days that large numbers of children were going missing. The children's homes knew it, the local authorities knew it, the child protection teams knew it, and the police and the MPs knew it. And instead of investigating, he was threatened and warned off and told to keep his mouth shut. So what we're seeing is the real facts about the numbers of children. Thousands, tens of thousands over the years, hundreds of thousands of children abused in the care system.
Well,
but we don't have a champion at all. Nobody's standing up in Westminster for this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. This year, we have been highlighting on the issue of missing children that are coming in as refugees, that are unaccompanied children, or have been trafficked into this country or brought into this country as victims of child trafficking. But this is a national scandal that has been going on for decades in this country with British children as well as with children being brought into the country. So let's just remind ourselves from last month, Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, at the time of the closing of the camp in Calais, saying we have about 100 unaccompanied children in train who we hope to bring over in the next few weeks. But on top of that, I've made it clear that we take children from the Dubs Agreement. Now, these new children that are coming in, this report that we're talking about is covering the period 2014 to 2015. So, in fact, if we look at the children that they were talking about in that report, they're saying the child trafficking victims who vanished from care were mainly from countries like Vietnam, Albania, and the UK. And the unaccompanied children who went missing from care are from places like Afghanistan, Eritrea, Albania, and Vietnam. So we haven't even got the statistics yet for any Syrian or children related to the Syrian conflict or Libya or this kind of thing. So we still have to wait for the latest statistics on that if they ever appear, because of course this is part of the problem. And if you remember last month, Stella Creasy saying bringing here every child who has a legal right to be in the United Kingdom would be a really good result. Well, it doesn't seem to be a really good result for quite a lot of them. And let's just remember who was the original MP who was pushing for this, Tim Farron. He didn't really say what's on screen at the moment, but I just thought that was appropriate under the circumstances. And if you remember back in October, I highlighted this organization, Help Refugees, who were absolutely campaigning for unaccompanied children from Calais to be brought over here. Now, I asked them about this issue of children disappearing from care, and this is what they had to say. They said, if it'll start, sorry. Thank you for your email and for your concern. The Dubs transfers are being carried out by the Home Office, who will be working with the Red Cross to ensure the protection of those children. Not our problem, Gov. We are currently in talks with Refugee Action. We will be collaborating on ensuring that those children brought to the UK are secure, cared for, and that their best interests are observed. We are fully aware of the risks of child trafficking within the UK. However, the risks of trafficking within refugee camps across Europe and across the world are exponentially high. Naturally, comparisons are difficult to draw. We feel that for those particularly vulnerable children who qualify under the Dubs Amendment, and for whom a best interests assessment recommends the transfer to the UK should be brought into the British care system. Thank you and kind regards.
Well, the big lie here, Mike, of course, is there is no British care system, because what we are seeing is whole-scale abuse of children within that system. So they're bringing these children in. They cannot guarantee the safety of the children in Britain. And Tim Farron was happy to say in an email that yes, out of the 300 missing Syrian children, yeah, it was inevitable there would have been some trafficked and abused. I understand that today, Mr. Farron, I must get it right, Mr. Farron is pushing out emails about flood defences. So he's not the slightest bit bothered about child abuse. He's getting a little bit worried because we're heading towards the rainy season. So this is spin and lies in order to bring in more children to be trafficked and abused.
That's what it looks like to me. Of course, we've been covering this subject for quite a long time. And this is the key report. That this absolutely demonstrates that Parliament, governments absolutely understand the reality of this situation. This report came out in 2012, the report from the Joint Inquiry into Children Who Go Missing from Care. And it's worth reminding ourselves what it says, because this was co-chaired by Ann Coffey MP. So what are they saying? There is a scandal going on in England involving children missing from care. Until recent cases of child sexual exploitation in Rochdale and other places put the spotlight on this issue, it was going on pretty much unnoticed. So according to the report, 68,000 children in care in the UK. The report says that the local authority with responsibility for a child is required to report on whether they have run away for more than 24 hours to the Department of Education once a year. Data for 2011 shows that 930 individual children went missing. Using this measure of going missing for over 24 hours, police figures suggest 17,000 incidents and 5,000 individual children going missing from care every year. And the report says, well, I'm asking how many of these children return, how many of them end up being trafficked. The report says that there are also major problems with the quality of data collected on trafficked children. The numbers recorded by CEOP, approximately 300 between 2007 and 2010, is widely thought to be the very tip of the iceberg, and the lack of robust and comprehensive data was also identified by the inquiry as a key obstacle to keeping these children safe. And this has been something that we have spoken about time and time again, Brian, in live presentations on the news program, in articles in the newspaper. They keep no records of children going missing. They don't know whether they've gone for 24 hours, for 48 hours, for a week, for a month, forever. They don't know if they ever come back. They don't know what happens to them. They don't know if they end up dead in a gutter. They don't care.
They don't care. That's the overriding thing. And if you haven't listened to the Dispatch's interview with the Met police officer, you need to listen to it, because he explains the scale of the cover-up and the fact that young girls in London were going out for to be prostitutes. He's talking about one young girl found dead in the gutter. And I think that was one of the key things which triggered that gentleman to blow the whistle, because he just saw the failure of the state to act to protect these children. Why is the British state failing to act? Because the British state is protecting the paedophiles who are around Westminster, and of course the British establishment, possibly some of the people that Theresa May have been speaking to.
Indeed.
I was going to say, bring in David Cameron. Bring back David Cameron.
No,
sorry.
No. Right, okay, here we go. David Cameron, speaking of the devil. David Cameron is doing a Tony Blair, Brian. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Doing a Tony Blair, paid £120,000 for a 1-hour speech.
It's obscene.
To be honest, I didn't read the article. I don't know where he was speaking. I don't care where he was speaking. I just wanted to make the point that it is just obscene that this man gets that kind of money for an hour's, well, it's not even work.
No. Well, let's take a look behind David Cameron, and we'll just have a very quick recap on what we were talking about yesterday. We're going to put it in a different context. So if we think about Theresa May talking in the City of London, she's talking about getting government working with the private sector. And let's have a look at how this thing really works. So just to recap here, we were flagging up that having identified a local authority chief executive, Kim Riley, who was instrumental in the pressure that was put on Anne Gregg, the mother of Holly Gregg, in that appalling abuse case. Well, he leaves the local council and he's promoted into SOLOS, which is the Society for the Chief Executives of Local Authorities. And we'd highlighted that in this as just one seminar that they had, they're talking about they are going to be the leaders in a changing world. They're going to be working with other institutions. Here we've got a university, but it quickly ties into the corporate sector. And we have so-called professionals, it appears, with no real practical experience of local authority government who are suddenly advising. Well, bear that in mind, and let's turn our attention to probation services, because we know that at the moment extraordinary things are happening in probation. Many, many good probation officers are leaving, and the ones who are remaining are being put under huge pressure. This was an article from the Chronicle. It's talking about Northumbria, and it says Sodexo to shed 131 probation jobs as workers are replaced with machines. Offenders monitored by Northumbria Community Rehabilitation Company can soon log into ATM-style kiosks using fingerprint technology. So the Northumbria Community Rehabilitation Company is actually what they describe as the French catering company Sodexo. I think it's a far cry from a catering company in UK, but they are the people behind that rehabilitation company. And the unions said quite rightly, well, they've slammed the plans, and they've said that they're downright dangerous. And the reason for this is, of course, one of the key jobs of probation officers is to continually risk assess people on probation to see whether they pose a threat to the public. So let's break this down even further. So if we have a look at that Northumbria Community Rehabilitation Company, the website's very soft. It's got a very touchy-feely look about it. And you have to look on a couple of pages. I've highlighted Sodexo on this page, but it's pretty difficult for a casual visitor to work out that it's really Sodexo that's behind this. But if you read their blurb, of course, it's all lovey-dovey. They're working in partnership. They're a key part of the criminal justice system, working alongside Northumbria Police, the Prison Service, and the National Probation Service to provide safer communities for local people. So everything is trust us, because, of course, we're there to protect you. So let's bring in David Cameron, because this is he's been one of the key players in this deceit on the British nation. We've got our government structure, the Ministry of Justice. What they've done is created an agency, which is the National Offender Management Service, and then that is the organisation that has outsourced services via Northumbria Community Rehabilitation Company. But of course, where it has really gone is through to Sodexo. And I did a little look at some of the names behind the Northumbria Community Rehabilitation Company, and very quickly you're coming up with Sodexo directors who may have directorships on 85 similar companies. So what we can show is that, of course, we've now got our public services, the good professional people being pushed out, and cheap French labour, to be crude about it, being brought in by David Cameron. This is privatisation. And of course, Gary Streeter, who we've already mentioned, our very own Conservative MP, says, don't worry, there's no chance that the NHS is going to be privatised. Well, of course, the NHS is being privatised by the same system.
Everything is being privatised.
Everything, Mike. So we'll bring it in again. And we're going to have a look at the South West Probation Service here, because we've got a rather different story. So basically, South West Probation was taken over by Working Links. And here's Working Links. Now, this is another sort of community interest company. And you'll see it's got the same linkage through with the National Offender Management Service. But when you dig into it, who is named Sodexo and G4S? So these immensely powerful private companies simply being handed British civil service and this particularly important role of the probation service. However, in the southwest, let's have a look at what's happened, because following the contract out to Working Links then ran into financial problems. Apparently, they underestimated the contract by a mere 40%. Do you believe that's possible, Mike? I don't know of any commercial organisation that would be so incompetent as to get it 40% wrong, but apparently they did. But what this has meant is that they've been taken over by German banking interests. And if we have a little look at some of the men, you can research these gentlemen on the internet. We've got hardline investment bankers now controlling, direct control of parts of UK's probation services. Here's the young man, Robert McElwain. He was the man who actually handled that contract to take over Working Links. So probation services being given to the French or to German bankers. And of course, this is treason carried out by our very own David Cameron, who can now earn £120,000 an hour talking about his treason. What are we going to do? Well, we've got to educate people. A few days left to get your tickets for the British Constitution Group event in Winchester this Saturday. We are looking, we think, at a packed hall, which is wonderful. If you want to be part of it, I'd encourage you to get your tickets now from the website. You can still pay on the door, but it will be slightly more expensive. But what have we got to do? We've got to get the truth out to the wider general public as to what has really been going on in UK, which of course is treason and huge amounts of our public infrastructure and services simply given away to profit-making corporations. It's obvious to see when you know where to look for it, Mike, I think.
Yes. Now, once again, a warning to viewers in case this next slide makes you feel ill. But the BBC Business today tweeting out, with Facebook and Google promising to crack down on fake news stories on hashtag BBC Biz Live, we want to know, have you fallen for hoax news? Well, if you have, probably only through watching the BBC. But anyway, we'll come on to that in a second. What is this about? Well, we talked about this a couple of days ago, that Facebook in particular was coming under pressure to get a handle on false stories because, of course, Donald Trump only got elected because of false stories that were appearing on Facebook. Google has got onto this as well. Both companies saying that they are going to begin to prevent display ads appearing in apps or on websites containing fake news. So I'm not clear as to who is going to decide what is fake and what isn't.
We probably need a government regulator, to tell us what's fake and what's real.
Well, quite possibly this is maybe part of the collaboration between private industry, private business, private corporations and government.
And the third sector, common purpose. Well, bring in the BBC, and an amazing article. Thank you very much for the gentleman who pointed this out to me. But here we are, BBC News, Donald Trump, how the media created the president. And it's David Silito, BBC. This was part of the article. What part did the media, both mainstream and alternative, play in Donald Trump's election success? This is an astonishing article, and I encourage people to read it. Let's have a look at what this man had to say. He said that more than 200 newspapers supported Clinton, while Trump received the backing of fewer than 20. Trump's victory then was a brutal kick in the teeth for those loathed pundits, insiders, and righteous mongers. But it was also a humiliation for the thousands of journalists who had spent months trying to warn the public about Donald Trump. So those nice journalists, they had our best interests at heart. We couldn't understand it ourselves, Mike.
No.
We needed Mr. Silito to tell us who the bad people were and make sure that we know what truth is.
Yeah.
Well, stay with it because it gets worse. I've called him delusional here, and I think this is about right. He quotes a gentleman called Jeff Jarvis of the Town Knight Centre for Entrepreneurial Journalism in New York. He's an enthusiastic and active supporter of Hillary Clinton, and he states the mere fact of Donald Trump's candidacy is evidence of the failure of journalism. He, like many other members of the liberal media class, feels Trump's success is a sign that the media failed to communicate the truth with enough force.
Well, this is interesting because this echoes very much what Theresa May was saying to the Guildhall audience. You know, you globalists, you haven't thrown enough pickings towards the poor and the suffering, so they're not happy with globalization. And he's saying, well, basically, the journalists didn't do enough to try to spin and sell.
So 200 papers support Clinton, which he says in his own article. But basically, they still haven't done enough work because the truth was the only president acceptable to the BBC and the banking elite was obviously Hillary Clinton. Well, let's carry on because it just gets more enjoyable. We had to have some more anti-Trump rhetoric. So we've got Jeff Jarvis again. He believes equating the issue of Hillary Clinton's email server with all the criticisms of Donald Trump in the name of balance was misleading. I think we'd rather say this. Let's not mention Clinton's financial crimes, weapons trafficking, trail of dead bodies, sexual depravity, lies to the Benghazi Committee, or massive US security breaches, because that would affect the balance and it would be misleading. This is the BBC at their best. And what have we got here? He says pollsters would dismiss social media as a self-selecting group that doesn't reflect the whole voting population, but it does perhaps give a clue to the emotional impact of a candidate. So we couldn't be objective about it. It was all to do with our emotions, what we saw, what we thought about Clinton. Unbelievable arrogance from this man.
And of course, he doesn't have any emotions, probably, so he may not understand
we're going to get a clue for that in a minute, I think he said. And he said the need for headlines that bring clicks and stories that get shared has changed everything. Dull, balanced articles, like this one, don't provoke fury, laughter, or much in the way of emotion. On the contrary, they do, Mr. Soletto, because we think it's the most biased, outrageous article we've read in some time, and we're delighted to have you on UK Column. So what's his real message is that voters or the public at large are silly, ignorant little people who need the likes of Mr. Soletto and the BBC to tell them what is the truth. And I'm saying here, I find his ignorance and arrogance dangerous and offensive. This is a very, very nasty individual. So I thought we needed to have a little look at his LinkedIn page. Well, not a lot on it, Mike, because it only goes back to 2013. Media and arts correspondent for the BBC. So I went on to his Twitter page. Well, my goodness, then it all unfolds because this is a mix of political rhetoric. He obviously completely hates Donald Trump. So, of course, he says this is not the BBC's view, but it absolutely is because he advertised himself as the BBC's correspondent. So this is an unbelievably biased set of information mixed in with really puerile stuff. So he's bigging it up here because he bumped into a Wookiee. I think the Wookiee's the one on the right. Is that correct? I'm not
sure. It's hard to tell.
I'm not sure. So this is a man of real political substance. He's got huge experience of the real world. He was actually born into the BBC, it would appear here. I think he was about 3. I don't know how old the article is, and the article is saying this is a photograph of him 20 years ago. But this is the point, isn't it? This man has not had any real experience of real life. He's in the bunker of the BBC. But it does get better, because let's look at the man who he talks about. Here he is, Jeff Jarvis, a big wheel professor for the Town Knight Centre for Entrepreneurial Journalism. And down at the bottom, difficult to read, but I've highlighted it, is that this man is promoted by the Economic Forum in Davos.
Good.
So he's just an ordinary journalist. And what does he do? Oh dear, he trains alternative media journalists.
He trains alternative media journalists?
Yeah, he trains basically internet journalists. So it would seem to me he might have an axe to grind that his training is not working very well. If you want to check this out, here's the classes he talks about. And so all of these individuals that he's trained in entrepreneurial, truthful, unbiased journalism are now being spread out across the world. But we just had a look at one gentleman here, Kabir Chiba, and oh dear, he works at the BBC. So it would appear that Mr. Soletto is promoting a BBC media trainer in his article, but he doesn't care to mention it.
No, well,
would that be bias?
Certainly. Well, couldn't have. I'm speechless. I'm speechless. But of course, we are talking here about fake news. And of course, the BBC would never produce fake news, would they?
Well, I think I've just shown they have, Mike. Yes, but if you've got another example, let's bring it on screen.
I do indeed, because of course, Saving Syria's Children, the BBC Panorama documentary in inverted commas, which appeared on the BBC News and then on Panorama, which for those outside the UK is the BBC's flagship documentary program. That appeared on the day or the day before of the Syria vote on whether we were going to bomb Syria in 2013. The timing, it was a fake story. The BBC getting directly involved in British politics in the most disgraceful way. The URL for this WordPress site is at the top there, BBC Panorama Saving Syria's Children.wordpress.com. Do have a look at this blog. Fantastic research from Robert, and he continues to try to campaign to get some justice from the BBC over the fact that they tried to influence that vote and influence people's opinions of Syria in such a disgraceful way.
Yeah. So from a hard-hitting news, if we're to end on a positive note, it seems to the UK column that Theresa May having to give this special brief to the powerhouse of City of London that they've taken a hit from, quote, alternative media, tells all of us that pushing out the truth, exposing what these people are doing, really doing, is the key weapon against them, and it's hurting them. And as a result, they're having to take special measures. But the prize for sheer propaganda and hypocrisy, we must award to the BBC once again for one of the most disgraceful articles I think we've read in some time. So if you feel as strongly as we do about that gentleman's work, maybe you'd like to visit his Twitter page or indeed email him direct at the BBC and ask how he can justify such an incredibly biased and rude article as far as the public's concerned. I'm having trouble with my words because obviously I'd like to use more descriptive language. Well, that brings us to the end of our news today. Oh, just one point before I forget it. Of course, Mike, you gave out the address there with BBC Panorama. It's been brought to my attention that Kerry Thomas has actually left the BBC and the head of BBC Panorama, and we believe he's gone as the media advisor to one of the big colleges. I think it's Oxford. So very interesting that the man who was apparently the powerhouse of the investigation into child abuse has mysteriously left the BBC and moved across to Oxford University. I wonder why. Tomorrow is Wednesday. We will be joined by Dave Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives.
Possibly Alex Thompson as well.
Possibly Alex Thompson as well. And Thursday, we're looking forward to having David Scott back with us. Friday, we will be travelling for the Winchester conference.
But we're still planning to have a programme for
transmitted
lunchtime on Friday, so do join us on Friday as well.
Okay, and for Thursday, we will also give an update on the Doherty family, because I know many of you are asking what is happening, and we're going to bring you the latest news that we have. So that will be that report on the docketies will be on Thursday. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.